Jake Morrison sat alone at the corner table of the Blue Moon Cantina. The drink in his hand had grown warm hours ago, but he did not care. Around him, aliens from 12 different worlds whispered and pointed. Their eyes showed fear when they looked at him. Fear and something else. Respect, maybe. Or terror. The cantina was on Nexus Prime, a trade station that floated between the stars. It was neutral ground where humans and aliens could meet safely, but safe was a word that meant different things now. 20 years had passed since the war ended, but the galaxy still remembered. They all remembered what humans could do when pushed too far. A young woman walked toward his table. She moved carefully like someone approaching a sleeping predator. Her press badge showed she was from the Galactic News Network. Lisa Kane, it read. Human. Like him. But young. Too young to remember the war. Commander Morrison, she asked. Her voice was steady, but Jake could hear the nervousness underneath. I'm Lisa Kane. I sent you the message about the interview. Jake looked up at her. She was maybe 25 years old, born after the war started. She had never seen what humans could become when their children were murdered. She had never heard the screams that still echoed in Jake's dreams. Sit down, he said. His voice was rough from years of shouting orders and breathing recycled air on warships. You want to know about the war, about why they look at us like that? He nodded toward the aliens at the other tables. Lisa sat down and pulled out a recording device. The galaxy has heard stories, she said. But most records from the war are classified. People say it changed everything, that it made humanity the most feared species in known space. Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. Feared. Yes, that's one word for it. He took a sip of his warm drink. You know what the Zephyrians called us before the war started? Soft mammals. Pink weaklings. They thought we would be easy to conquer. The reporter leaned forward. Tell me about first contact. How did it all begin? Jake's eyes went distant. He was seeing the past now, remembering things he had tried to forget. It was 22 years ago. I was just a lieutenant then, serving, on patrol duty near the edge of human space. Captain Ryan Walsh was commanding the UES Discovery. Good man. Fair captain. He believed in peace. The cantina noise faded as Jake spoke. His voice took on the tone of someone telling a story that still hurt to remember. We had been exploring for months, looking for new worlds to settle. Humanity was growing fast, and Earth was getting crowded. We had 3 colony ships with us. The New Hope, the Bright Future, and the Tomorrow's Dream. 50,000 people total, families, children, people looking for a new start. Lisa's recording device hummed quietly between them. Around them, the aliens continued their whispered conversations, but Jake could feel them listening. Then we found them, Jake continued. The Zephyrians, 7-foot-tall reptiles with technology that was centuries ahead of ours. They had controlled 12 star systems for over 1,000 years. Warriors, they called themselves. Proud fighters who lived by something they called the honor code. Jake's hand tightened around his glass. Captain Walsh tried to make peaceful contact. He sent messages in every language our computers could translate. Mathematical formulas, pictures of Earth, music. He wanted them to know we came in peace. The old soldier paused, his eyes still focused on memories that played out behind his closed eyelids. The Zephyrian fleet commander was named Crixtal the Proud. That was how he introduced himself when he finally answered our messages. Crixtal the Proud, conqueror of worlds, defender of the honor. Lisa waited, sensing that the important part was coming. You know what he said to Captain Walsh? Jake asked. His voice was getting quieter, more dangerous. He said that soft mammals had no right to travel among the stars. He said that weak species should stay on their homeworlds and serve their betters. He gave us one chance to turn around and never come back. Jake finished his drink in one gulp. Captain Walsh tried to negotiate. He explained that we were just looking for empty worlds to settle, that we had no interest in conflict. But Crixtal had already made his decision. He said that humans needed to learn their place in the galaxy. The reporter's face was pale now. She was beginning to understand where this story was going. They opened fire without another word, Jake said. No warning, no declaration of war, they just started shooting. The Discovery had military shields, so we survived the first attack. But the colony ships... He shook his head. They were civilian vessels. No weapons, no armor. 50,000 people who just wanted a new home. Jake stood up and walked to the cantina's large window. Outside, the stars shone cold and distant. I watched those ships die, he said. Watched them break apart in space. Watched the bodies of children float past our windows. The Zephyrians didn't even try to rescue survivors. They just kept shooting until there was nothing left but debris. Lisa had stopped taking notes. Her hands were shaking slightly. Captain Walsh sent a message back to Earth. Jake continued. Just 4 words. They killed our children. Then we ran. The Discovery was fast, but not fast enough to fight a whole Zephyrian fleet. We barely made it home. Jake turned back to face the reporter. His eyes were cold now, like winter on a dead world. 3 days later, Earth's response came back through subspace radio. It wasn't addressed to Captain Walsh or to me. It was broadcast, on all frequencies aimed at Zephyrian space. The cantina had gone completely quiet now. Even the aliens had stopped talking to listen. The message was simple, Jake said. Just one sentence. You have made a grave mistake. That was all. But somehow, those 5 words carried more threat than any declaration of war. Lisa found her voice. What happened next? Jake smiled, and for the first time since she had met him, it looked genuine, but it was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator remembering a successful hunt. Next, he said, next the galaxy learned what humans do when someone murders their children. Next, Admiral Kate Sullivan got her orders from the Human Coalition. One directive: end the threat permanently. Jake sat back down at the table. Around them, the alien patrons were beginning to leave. They had heard enough. That's when the real war started, Jake said. That's when the Zephyrians learned why you should never attack something that fights back. Lisa Kane stared at Jake Morrison across the table. The old soldier's face showed no emotion, but his hands were steady on his empty glass. Around them, the cantina had grown quieter. The few aliens still there kept looking over with nervous eyes. Tell me about the first strike, Lisa said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Jake nodded slowly. 6 months after the colony ships died, Admiral Kate Sullivan assembled the largest fleet in human history. 200 warships. Every gun, every missile, every fighter that Earth could build. But the ships weren't the scary part. He paused, remembering. The scary part was Lieutenant Colonel Alex Turner and his ground forces, the 7th Assault Division. 3,000 of the meanest humans ever born. They had trained for one thing: fighting aliens who thought humans were weak. Lisa leaned forward. What made them different? Jake's eyes grew distant again. Other species. In the galaxy fight with honor codes. Rules about how war should be conducted. The Zephyrians had fought wars for centuries, always following the same patterns. Big fleets meet in space. Armies line up on planets. Winners take prisoners. Losers surrender with dignity. Jake shook his head. Humans don't fight like that. We learned our lessons in wars against each other. Wars where survival mattered more than honor. The old soldier stood up and walked to the window again. Outside, a Zephyrian merchant ship was docking at the station. Jake watched it with eyes that held old hatred. The first battle was at Zephyr 4, he said. A mining world with 2 million Zephyrian civilians. Their military expected us to attack the orbital defenses first. Standard procedure. Instead, Colonel Turner landed his troops on the dark side of the planet. Lisa was writing notes now, trying to capture every word. The Zephyrians had never seen guerrilla warfare. Jake continued. Turner's forces hit supply convoys. Destroyed. Communication towers. Poisoned water supplies. They didn't attack the enemy army, they attacked everything that kept the enemy army running. Jake turned back to face her. Dr. Michelle Barnes was with Turner's forces. Xenobiologist, smartest woman I ever met. She had studied Zephyrian biology for months after first contact, found their weaknesses. The reporter felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of weaknesses? Diseases, Jake said simply. Earth bacteria that couldn't hurt humans but made Zephyrians very sick. Dr. Barnes put those bacteria in their food, supplies, in their water, in the air systems of their cities. Jake sat back down. His voice was matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather. Within 2 weeks, half the planet's population was too sick to fight. The other half was taking care of the sick. The Zephyrian military had to choose between fighting us and saving their people. Lisa's pen had stopped moving. That's biological warfare. Yes, Jake said. It is. And it worked. The cantina felt colder now. Even the background music seemed quieter. The Zephyrian fleet commander sent a message to Colonel Turner. Jake continued. Demanded that he follow the galactic rules of war. Said that using disease weapons was dishonorable. Against the codes that civilized species followed. Jake smiled that cold smile again. Turner sent back a recording. Just him, standing in front of a pile of debris from one of our destroyed colony ships. He said, "You want to talk about honor? You murdered 50,000 of our children. We're just returning the favor." Lisa felt sick. What happened to the prisoners? What prisoners? Jake asked. The Zephyrians expected to be treated according to galactic conventions. Expected clean cells, proper food, medical care. Expected to be exchanged when the war ended. The old soldier's voice grew harder. But humans never agreed to follow alien rules. Commander Ben Foster was in charge of prisoner operations. He put captured Zephyrians to work in the mines they had built. Made them fix the damage their own weapons had caused. Fed them the same poisoned food they had been eating. Jake leaned back in his chair. The galaxy was watching by then. Other species started sending messages to both sides, trying to mediate, trying to get humans to follow proper war procedures. Lisa looked up from her notes. Did Earth respond? Admiral Sullivan sent one message to the Galactic Defense Council, Jake said. Short and simple. We didn't start this war, but we will finish it. Stay out of our way. The reporter could hear her own heartbeat in the silence that followed. That's when the other species got scared, Jake continued. The Andromedans pulled their trade ships out of human space. The Centauri Collective canceled all diplomatic meetings. Even the peaceful Etherians started building defense platforms near their borders. Jake gestured toward the aliens in the cantina. Look at them. 20 years later and they still watch us like we might explode. That fear started during the second month of the war. Lisa followed his gaze. A group of Andromedans at a nearby table were whispering urgently. One of them kept glancing at Jake with wide, nervous eyes. The Zephyrians called for help, Jake said. Sent messages to every allied species. These humans are savages, they said. They don't follow the rules. They need to be stopped before they become a threat to everyone. Jake's laugh was bitter. But nobody came to help. Other species started studying human military history, started learning about our wars against each other. The more they learned, the more scared they became. The old soldier finished his second drink. Dr. Frank Lee was part of a human diplomatic team back then. He reported that alien governments were having emergency meetings, not about stopping the war, but about what to do if humans won. Lisa looked confused. If humans won, weren't the Zephyrians stronger? On paper, yes, Jake said. Better technology, more ships, bigger population. But they were fighting by rules we had never agreed to follow. They expected honor. We gave them efficiency. Jake stood up to leave. By the end of the second month, something had changed in the galaxy. The Galactic Defense Council passed the first human protocol, emergency procedures for dealing with human military forces. Lisa gathered her notes quickly. What kind of procedures? Jake paused at the cantina door. Simple ones. If humans declare war on your species, evacuate all civilians immediately. Don't try to negotiate, don't expect mercy, just run and hope they let you live. The old soldier looked back at her one more time. That protocol is still in effect today. 20 years later, want to know why? Lisa nodded, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Because the war was just getting started, Jake said, and the galaxy hadn't seen anything yet. He walked out into the corridor, leaving Lisa alone with her notes and the frightened whispers of aliens who still remembered what humans could do when their children died. Lisa Kane found Jake Morrison the next day at the same table in the Blue Moon Cantina. He was staring out the window at the stars, a fresh drink in his hand. The aliens in the cantina gave his table even more space than before. Word had spread about their conversation. "You came back," Jake said without looking at her. "I need to hear the rest," Lisa said, sitting down across from him. "What happened after the human protocol was created?" Jake turned his attention to her. His eyes looked older today, like talking about the war had aged him overnight. The real war started then. What came before was just the opening act. He took a slow sip of his drink. General Amanda Cross took over strategic planning 6 months into the conflict. She called a meeting of all human military commanders. I was there as Admiral Sullivan's aide. Lisa turned on her recording device. Around them, the cantina seemed to hold its breath. General Cross stood up in front of a room full of officers, Jake continued, and said 3 words that changed everything. Total war doctrine. That was when we stopped pretending this was a normal conflict. The old soldier's voice dropped lower. She explained it simply. We weren't just fighting to defeat the Zephyrian military. We were fighting to make sure they could never threaten humanity again. Ever. Lisa felt the temperature in the room seem to drop. What did that mean? It meant Captain Steve Martin and his orbital bombardment fleet got new orders, Jake said. Not just hit military targets, hit everything. Factories, farms, schools, hospitals. If it kept Zephyrian society running, it was a target. Jake stood up and began pacing by the window. The galaxy watched in horror as human ships systematically destroyed entire worlds. Not just conquered them, destroyed them, made them unable to support life. The reporter looked down at her notes, trying to process what she was hearing. How could the military justify targeting civilians? Jake stopped pacing and looked at her with cold eyes. 50,000 dead children justify a lot of things. General, Cross put it simply. They started this war by killing our innocents. We'll end it by making sure they can't kill anymore. He sat back down. Major Holly Stewart was running special operations by then. Her teams were different from regular soldiers. They spoke Zephyrian languages, knew their culture, their fears. Lisa leaned forward. What did they do? Psychological warfare, Jake said. Stewart's people would infiltrate Zephyrian communication networks and broadcast recordings. Sounds of human children screaming as their colony ships died. Messages from the dead, asking why the Zephyrians had killed them. The old soldier's voice became distant. They also spread false information, made the Zephyrians think their own government was planning to surrender, made them believe their allies had abandoned them, turned their own propaganda against them. Jake paused to finish his drink. But the worst part was what Major Stewart called escalation psychology. Her teams would study Zephyrian military leaders, learn their families, their fears, their weaknesses. Lisa's pen had stopped moving. She was afraid to ask, but she had to know. What did they do with that information? They used it, Jake said simply. If a Zephyrian commander hesitated to attack human forces, Stewart's people would send him pictures of his family. Not threats exactly, just pictures, with messages like, "We know where they live." The cantina was completely silent now. Even the background music had stopped. The Zephyrians tried one last major offensive, Jake continued. Krixtal the Proud gathered every ship he could find, called in favors from allied species, built the largest war fleet in galactic history. Jake's eyes grew bright with a terrible memory. They attacked Kepler Station, our main supply depot. Thought if they could cut our supply lines, they could force us to negotiate. Lisa found her voice. What happened? The Battle of Kepler Station, Jake said. 3 days of fighting that changed how the galaxy thinks about warfare. Admiral Carl Hayes was commanding our defense fleet. Good man, but he had orders from General Cross. Jake stood up again, this time walking to the cantina's bar. He ordered another drink, then continued talking while the bartender poured. Hayes let the Zephyrian fleet get close, he said. Let them think they were winning. Then he activated weapons that had never been used in galactic warfare. The old soldier returned to the table with his fresh drink. Antimatter bombs, quantum. Viruses that could destroy entire computer networks. Weapons that didn't just kill enemy soldiers, but made their ships uninhabitable for centuries. Lisa's face had gone pale. That's against galactic law. What law? Jake asked. Humans never signed those treaties. We never agreed to limit our weapons. Why should we fight with one hand tied behind our backs? He took a long drink. The Zephyrian fleet was destroyed in 6 hours, not defeated. Destroyed. Every ship turned into radioactive debris. 40,000 Zephyrian warriors dead. Jake looked out the window again. But that wasn't the worst part. Dr. Peter Blake was with the refugee populations by then, studying how the war was affecting civilian Zephyrians. The reporter waited for him to continue. He found something the galaxy had never seen before, Jake said. An entire species developing trauma just from fighting against humans. Zephyrian. Civilians were having nightmares about creatures they had never seen. Children were afraid to sleep because they dreamed of human soldiers. Jake's voice became softer, more thoughtful. Dr. Blake called it species-wide post-traumatic stress disorder. The idea of fighting humans had become so terrifying that it was breaking their minds. Lisa looked up from her notes. How did the galactic community react? Panic, Jake said. The Galactic Defense Council held emergency sessions every day. Other species started pulling their military forces back from anywhere near human space. Trade stopped. Diplomacy stopped. Everyone was afraid we might turn on them next. The old soldier finished his drink and stood up to leave. 3 weeks after Kepler Station, the Zephyrian Military Command sent a message to General Cross. Not a surrender. Not a negotiation, a plea. Lisa gathered her things quickly, not wanting him to leave before finishing the story. What did they say? Jake paused at the cantina door. They begged us to stop, said they would give us anything we wanted. Territory, resources, technology. They just wanted the killing to end. He looked back at her one more time. General Cross sent back a single-word response. No. Jake walked out into the corridor, leaving Lisa alone with the weight of what she had heard. Around her, the alien patrons were finishing their drinks and leaving quickly. None of them wanted to stay in the same room where human warfare had been discussed. The young reporter sat alone, staring at her notes and wondering how much worse the story could get. Tomorrow she would learn about the final phase of the war, the part that made the galaxy whisper humanity's name in terror even 20 years later. 3 days later, Lisa Kane waited at the same table in the Blue Moon Cantina. Jake Morrison was late, and she was beginning to worry he wouldn't come. The story he was telling was getting darker with each part, and she could see it was taking a toll on the old soldier. When Jake finally arrived, he looked tired, more tired than before. He sat down without ordering a drink and stared at the table for a long moment. This part is the hardest to tell, he said quietly. This is the part that made the galaxy afraid of us forever. Lisa turned on her recording device. The cantina was nearly empty today. Word had spread about their conversations, and most aliens were avoiding the place entirely. After the Zephyrians begged for mercy, Jake began. General Cross called another meeting. But this time it wasn't just military commanders. Politicians from Earth were there too. Scientists, historians. They were planning something bigger than anyone had imagined. Jake finally looked up at Lisa. His eyes held a sadness she hadn't seen before. Colonel Nancy Price was put in charge of occupation forces. She was a logistics expert, good at organizing things, making systems work efficiently. The old soldier paused, gathering his thoughts. Price's job wasn't just to defeat the remaining Zephyrian forces. Her job was to make sure the Zephyrian species could never threaten humanity again. Ever. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. What did that mean? It meant Lieutenant Sam Davis and his technical teams were sent to every Zephyrian world, Jake said. Their orders were simple. Find every piece of military technology. every weapons factory, every research facility, not to capture them, to understand them completely. Jake stood up and walked to the window. Outside, a Zephyrian merchant was arguing with station security about docking fees. The alien's voice was high and nervous even over such a small matter. Davis and his people didn't just take Zephyrian technology, Jake continued. They reverse-engineered everything, learned how it worked. Then they built countermeasures, weapons designed specifically to destroy Zephyrian ships, viruses that could shut down Zephyrian computers, biological agents that only affected Zephyrian physiology. The reporter was writing frantically, trying to capture every word. Why go to such extremes? Jake turned back to face her. Because humans think long-term. We learned from our own history that defeating an enemy once isn't enough. They might rebuild. They might come back stronger. The only way to be truly safe is to make sure they can never be a threat again. He sat back down, his voice becoming more clinical. But the technology was just the beginning. Colonel Price implemented what she called bloodline tracking. Every Zephyrian family was cataloged, their genetic patterns recorded, their locations monitored. Lisa looked up from her notes. They tracked entire families? For generations, Jake said. The computers Colonel Price built could predict which Zephyrian children might grow up to become military leaders, which ones had the genetic markers for aggression, which ones might someday want revenge against humanity. The old soldier's voice was flat now, emotionless. Those children were marked, not killed, just watched. Forever. If any of them ever showed signs of organizing resistance, human agents would visit their families. Lisa's pen had stopped moving. What kind of visits? Quiet ones, Jake said. Dr. Frank Lee documented the process. Human agents would simply appear at a Zephyrian home. They wouldn't threaten anyone. They would just stand there for a few minutes, then leave. The message was clear. We know who you are, where you live, and what you're thinking. Jake ordered a drink from a passing server. When it arrived, he stared into it without drinking. But the worst part was what Lieutenant Davis called dead man switches, and he continued. Automated systems hidden throughout former Zephyrian space. Weapons platforms, computer viruses, biological agents, all dormant, waiting. Lisa found her voice. Waiting for what? Waiting for any sign that Zephyrians were rebuilding their military, Jake said. The systems were designed to activate automatically if they detected certain patterns. Too many ships gathering in one place. Too much metal being refined. Too many young Zephyrians joining together. The old soldier finally took a sip of his drink. If those systems ever activated, they would sterilize entire worlds. Not just destroy the military targets. Kill everything. Plants, animals, bacteria. Turn living worlds into dead rocks floating in space. The cantina felt colder now. Even the few remaining alien patrons were whispering more quietly. Ambassador Linda Moore tried to explain it to the Galactic Council, Jake continued. She called it species-level deterrence. The idea that the cost of attacking humanity would be so terrible that no rational species would ever try. Lisa looked up from her notes. How did the galaxy react? Terror, Jake said simply. Other species realized that humanity had moved beyond simple warfare. We had created a system where our enemies couldn't just be defeated, they could be erased from existence. Jake stood up and began pacing again. Dr. Ellen Gray was studying alien psychology during the occupation. She found that other species were changing their behavior just because of what humans had done to the Zephyrians. The reporter waited for him to continue. Trade routes were redesigned to avoid human space, Jake said. Not because of embargoes or sanctions, because alien ship captains were afraid to get too close to our territory. Military exercises were canceled if they happened anywhere near human systems. He stopped pacing and looked directly at Lisa. Entire species began rewriting their military doctrine, not to fight humans, but to avoid ever giving humans a reason to fight them. Jake sat back down. The Andromedans developed what they called Terra protocols. Emergency plans for what to do if humanity ever declared war on them. Step 1. Immediate. Evacuation of all civilians. Step 2. Complete military surrender. Step 3. Pray that humans would accept surrender instead of total destruction. Lisa's hands were shaking slightly as she wrote. Did these protocols work? They were never tested, Jake said. Because after what happened to the Zephyrians, no species has ever been stupid enough to attack humanity again. The old soldier finished his drink and prepared to leave. The war officially ended 14 months after it started, but the real end came when the last Zephyrian military commander sent a message to Colonel Price. Lisa gathered her things quickly. What did the message say? Jake paused at the cantina door. It wasn't a surrender. Surrenders can be taken back. It was an oath, a promise that no Zephyrian would ever again raise a weapon against a human being. Not just for now, forever. He looked back at her one more time. Colonel Price accepted the oath, but she also sent a response, a single sentence that every species in the galaxy has memorized by now. Lisa waited, knowing this was important. We will be watching, Jake said. 3 words that changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Jake walked out into the corridor, leaving Lisa alone with the terrible weight of what she had learned. Around her, the last few alien patrons finished their drinks and left. Quickly. None of them wanted to stay in a place where humanity's true nature had been discussed so openly. The young reporter sat alone, staring at her notes and wondering if the galaxy would ever feel safe again. Lisa Kane arrived at the Blue Moon Cantina for the final time. Jake Morrison was already there, sitting at their usual table. But something was different today. The cantina was completely empty except for them. The alien patrons had stopped coming, entirely. Last day, Jake said as she sat down. You ready to hear how this story ends? Lisa turned on her recording device one final time. I think so, though I'm not sure I want to know. Jake nodded. 20 years have passed since the war ended. 20 years since the Zephyrian species learned to whisper when they speak about humans. You want to know what those 20 years have been like? The old soldier gestured around the empty cantina. Look around. This place used to be full of traders from dozens of worlds. Now they avoid any station where humans might be present. That's our legacy. Lisa looked at her notes from the previous days. Tell me about the aftermath. What happened to the people who fought in the war? We came home, Jake said simply. Admiral Sullivan retired to a farm on New Kansas. General Cross took a job teaching military history. Colonel Price became a school administrator. We all tried to go back to normal lives. He paused, staring out the window at the empty docking bays. But normal was different now. Earth had changed. Humanity had changed. We had learned something about ourselves that we couldn't unlearn. Jake stood up and walked to the window. Captain Chris Bell commands routine patrol missions now. Nothing like the war fleets we used to run. But even his small ship carries more fear than the largest alien battleship. Lisa looked confused. What do you mean? Last month, Bell's ship encountered pirates attacking a merchant convoy. Jake explained. 7 pirate vessels against 1 human patrol ship. The pirates should have had every advantage. The old soldier turned back to face her. But when the pirates realized they were facing a human ship, they surrendered immediately. Didn't fire a shot. Didn't even try to run. They just stopped what they were doing and begged Bell not to hurt them. Jake sat back down. Bell told me later that the pirate captain was crying, a grown alien warrior crying like a child because he thought he was about to face human warfare. Lisa was writing notes, but her hands were unsteady. What did Captain Bell do? He arrested them, Jake said. Standard procedure, no violence needed. But the pirates spent the entire trip to prison, telling anyone who would listen about their narrow escape from the terrible humans. The old soldier smiled, but it was a sad smile. That story spread through the criminal networks within days. Now pirates avoid any shipping lane that might have human protection. Not because we patrol them more heavily. Just because the possibility exists. Jake ordered a drink from the automated serving system. The cantina's alien staff had stopped showing up for work days ago. Dr. Ellen Gray studies this phenomenon now, he continued. She calls it reputation warfare, the idea that our reputation has become a weapon more powerful than our actual ships and soldiers. Lisa looked up from her notes. Give me an example. The Centauri border conflict, Jake said. 2 alien species, fighting over mining rights in a disputed system. The war had been going on for 3 years, thousands dead on both sides. Jake took a sip of his drink. Then somebody suggested bringing in human mediators, not human soldiers, not human weapons, just human diplomats to help negotiate. The old soldier's voice became quieter. Both sides agreed to immediate ceasefire within hours of that suggestion, not because they wanted human help, because they were terrified of what might happen if they said no to humans. Lisa set down her pen. That's insane. That's our reality now, Jake said. Admiral Tony Clark, my old commander, runs the Strategic Planning Division. He told me that human involvement has prevented 17 separate interstellar wars in the past decade. Jake stood up and began pacing. Not through military action, not through threats, just by existing. Other species are so afraid of triggering our total war doctrine that they settle their disputes peacefully rather than risk human attention. The reporter found her voice. Is that good or bad? Jake stopped pacing and looked at her with tired eyes. I don't know anymore. We achieved perfect deterrence. No species will ever attack humanity again. But the cost was becoming something that the galaxy fears more than death itself. He sat back down and finished his drink. There are human children now who don't know why aliens look at them with such fear. Kids who were born after the war ended. They're growing up in a galaxy where their species name is whispered like a curse. Lisa looked around the empty cantina. What about the future? Will things ever go back to normal? Jake shook his head. Mrs. June Foster teaches at the primary school on New Earth. She has to explain to 6-year-old children why alien visitors sometimes run away when they see human faces. The old soldier's voice became softer. She tells them that a long time. Some bad aliens hurt human families, so human soldiers made sure those aliens could never hurt anyone again. She doesn't tell them how we did it. Jake stood up to leave for the final time. But those children will grow up knowing that their species is the most feared in the galaxy. They'll carry that knowledge with them forever. Lisa gathered her notes and recording equipment. Where does this end, Commander? Will the galaxy ever stop being afraid of us? Jake paused at the cantina door. I was in a meeting last week with other retired officers. Admiral Clark was there, General Cross, Colonel Price. We were talking about the same question. He looked back at her with eyes that held 20 years of regret. General Cross said something that stays with me. She said, we won the war so completely that we lost something else. We lost the possibility of ever being seen as anything other than monsters. Jake stepped into the corridor, then turned back one more time. You know what the real tragedy is? We're not monsters. We're just humans who were pushed too far, but the galaxy will never see the difference. Lisa watched him walk away down the empty corridor. Around her, the Blue Moon Cantina sat silent and abandoned. Outside the windows, alien ships were changing course to avoid the station entirely. The reputation of humanity had spread even to this neutral ground. She looked down at her notes, pages and pages of testimony about a war that lasted only 18 months, but changed the galaxy forever. The story of how humanity became so feared that their name was whispered in terror across 1,000 worlds. In her final report, Lisa Kane would write about the price of perfect victory, about how a species could win so completely that they lost their place in the community of civilized worlds, about how fear, once planted, could grow until it consumed everything around it. But that night, alone in her quarters, Lisa Kane did something she had never done before. She locked her door twice and checked the window seals before going to sleep. Because she had learned something in those 5 days of interviews, she had learned why the galaxy whispered humanity's name in terror. And for the first time in her life, she understood why they were right to be afraid.